The doorbell rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember because I was staring at the clock on my kitchen wall, wondering why time felt like it had stopped. My son Marcus had been married for exactly 6 days, and I hadn't heard from him since the wedding. When I opened that door, there stood my new daughter-in-law, Elena, with a leather briefcase and a man in a gray suit I'd never seen before. "Hello, Margaret," she said, her voice completely different from the sweet, nervous girl who'd asked for my blessing just 3 months earlier. "This is Mr. Davidson, a notary public. We need to talk." That was the moment I realized I had been played. Completely. By someone I had welcomed into my home, my family, my heart. If you've ever felt like someone you trusted was systematically taking everything from you, if you've ever wondered how you could be so blind to manipulation happening right under your nose, then you need to hear this story. If this resonates with you at all, please hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video and share it if you think someone else needs to hear that they're not alone in this kind of situation. Let me start from the beginning because the warning signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. My husband Robert passed away 2 years ago. We'd been married for 34 years, and he left me our family home. A beautiful Victorian we'd restored together over decades, plus some rental properties and a decent nest egg. Nothing extravagant, but enough for me to live comfortably and maybe help my son Marcus when he was ready to start his own family. Marcus was 28, working as an electrician, still figuring things out. He'd always been my gentle soul, maybe too gentle. After his father died, he became almost protective of me, checking in constantly, worried I was lonely. Then he met Elena at a coffee shop downtown. She was working as a barista while studying to become a paralegal. Beautiful girl, with these big brown eyes and this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room when she talked to you. That should have been my first red flag. Elena started coming around more and more, always with little gifts, flowers from the shop, homemade cookies, a scarf she said reminded her of me. She'd ask about the house, our family history, how Robert and I had managed our finances. "I'm just so interested in how successful couples build their lives together," she'd say, her eyes wide with what I thought was admiration. "You and Robert created such a beautiful legacy. Marcus is so lucky to have learned from you." She made me feel valued, seen, like my experience mattered. She was studying me, learning everything she could about what I owned, how I thought, what made me feel special. Within 6 months, Marcus was head over heels. Elena would suggest little changes. Maybe Marcus should have a key to my house since he was checking on me so often. Maybe they should get their own place nearby, but keep the key just in case. Maybe I should meet with her paralegal instructor who did some estate planning on the side, to make sure all my affairs were in order. "After what happened to Robert," she'd say, taking my hand, "we just want to make sure you're protected, Mom." She called me Mom before they were even engaged. When Marcus proposed, Elena made such a big deal about wanting my blessing, wanting to be a real daughter to me. She even asked if she could wear my wedding veil. "I never had a real family," she told me one afternoon while we planned the wedding. "My parents divorced when I was little, and I bounced around between relatives. When I see what you and Marcus have, the way you love each other, I want to be part of something like that forever." How do you say no to that? How do you not open your arms to someone who's telling you they've been waiting their whole life for a family like yours? So I paid for the wedding. The whole thing. $28,000. Elena said her family couldn't contribute much, and Marcus was already stressed about money. "Let me do this for you," I told them. "Let me give you the wedding you deserve." Elena cried when I told her. Real tears. She hugged me so tight and whispered, "Thank you for loving me like a real daughter." I thought I was investing in my son's happiness, in our family's future. The wedding was beautiful. Elena looked stunning in my veil, and Marcus couldn't stop smiling. During her vows, she talked about how grateful she was to be joining our family, how she promised to honor the legacy Robert and I had built, how she would always put family first. But there were things that felt off. Elena's family was there, more of them than I'd expected for someone who'd claimed to have no one. Her uncle gave a toast about how smart and determined she was, how she always got what she set her mind to. The way some of her cousins looked at our house when they came for the reception, like they were appraising it. And Elena kept introducing me to people as Marcus's mother, who's been so generous with us. Not just generous. So generous. Like it was this ongoing thing they expected to continue. But I pushed those feelings down. This was my son's wedding day. Elena was nervous, her family was just proud of her, and I was being paranoid. After the reception, as they were leaving for their honeymoon, Elena hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Mom. I promise I'll take good care of our family." Our family. Not Marcus's family, or the family she was joining. Our family. That was 6 days before she showed up at my door with the notary. So there I was, standing in my own doorway, looking at Elena and this notary, Mr. Davidson. Elena was holding a manila envelope and had this expression I'd never seen before. Calm, professional, almost cold. "May we come in?" she asked. I led them to my living room. The same room where she'd sat dozens of times, telling me about her childhood, her dreams, asking about my marriage to Robert. Elena sat on my couch like she owned it and opened her briefcase. "Margaret," she said, pulling out a thick stack of papers, "Marcus and I have been doing some research, and we've discovered some irregularities with your estate planning. There are some legal vulnerabilities that could cause problems for Marcus down the road." I didn't understand. Robert and I had been careful. We'd worked with a good attorney. Everything was in order. "The issue," Elena continued, "is that with recent changes in tax law, everything you inherited from Robert could be subject to much higher estate taxes than you realize. If something happened to you, Marcus could lose a significant portion of his inheritance just to taxes." The notary nodded gravely. "Mrs. Patterson, I've seen families lose their homes over issues like this." Elena slid the papers toward me. "But there's a solution. If you transfer the properties to Marcus now, while you're alive, we can avoid those taxes entirely. You can still live here, of course. Nothing changes for you day to day. But legally, the assets would be protected." I stared at the papers. They wanted me to sign over my house, the rental properties, even my savings accounts. Everything. "This protects you too, Mom," Elena said, her voice taking on that sweet tone I remembered. "If you ever needed long-term care, having the assets in Marcus's name would protect them from being seized to pay for medical costs." It almost made sense. Almost. "I need to think about this," I said. "I want to talk to my attorney." Elena and the notary exchanged a look. "Of course," Elena said. "But Mrs. Patterson, there is a time sensitivity here. These tax law changes go into effect at the end of the month. If we wait much longer, this window of opportunity closes." The notary opened his briefcase and pulled out his stamp and seal. "I can handle everything right here today. No need to make multiple trips or appointments." "Where's Marcus?" I asked. "I want to talk to Marcus about this." "Marcus is working," Elena said. "But he's the one who asked me to handle this. He's worried about you, Mom. We both are. He doesn't want you to have to deal with the stress of complicated legal matters." She leaned forward. "Marcus knows you trust me to look out for the family's best interests. That's why he asked me to take care of this." Something in my gut was screaming. This felt wrong. The timing, the pressure, the way they had answers for every concern I raised. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. Elena's expression shifted. Just for a second, I saw something cold flash in her eyes. "Margaret," she said, her voice losing its warmth, "I understand you're scared. Change is always frightening. But Marcus and we're trying to protect our family. All of us." Our family. There it was again. I said no. Not today. The notary started packing up his things, looking uncomfortable. Elena sat there for another long moment, staring at me. "I hope you'll reconsider," she said finally. "For Marcus's sake." After they left, I sat in my living room shaking. I called Marcus immediately. "Hey, Mom," he answered, and just hearing his voice made me want to cry. "Marcus, Elena was just here with some legal papers. She said you asked her to." "Oh, the estate planning stuff?" His voice was casual, distracted. "Yeah, she mentioned she found some tax issues. Pretty smart of her to research all that, right? I told her to handle whatever needed to be done. You know, I don't understand all that legal stuff." My heart sank. Elena hadn't lied about that part. Marcus really had asked her to handle it. Sweetheart, I said carefully, these papers would transfer ownership of everything to you. The house, the rental properties, everything. Well, yeah, eventually it's all going to be mine anyway, right? Elena says this just protects it from taxes. Makes sense to me. Marcus, I need you to come over. Tonight. We need to talk about this in person. Mom, I can't tonight. Elena's making dinner for her family. Maybe this weekend. Elena's family. On a Tuesday night. 6 days after their wedding. This is important, Marcus. So is this dinner, Mom. Elena's been planning it for weeks. After I hung up, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Elena hadn't been planning anything for weeks. They'd just gotten back from their honeymoon yesterday. Marcus had lied to me. Or Elena had lied to him. Or they were lying together. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying conversations, looking for signs I'd missed. I thought about Elena's uncle's toast, about how her family had looked at my house, about all her questions over the months. I thought about how isolated I'd become. Most of my friends were older, and several had passed away in the years since Robert died. My social life had revolved around Elena and Marcus. When was the last time I talked to someone else about anything important? I realized Elena had been systematically separating me from other influences. Not obviously, not dramatically. Just whenever I mentioned talking to my attorney about something, she'd suggest I was worrying too much. When I thought about joining a widow support group, she'd insist I didn't need that kind of negativity, when I had family who loved me. I'd thought I was being taken care of, but I was being isolated. The next morning I called my attorney, David Morton. I'd known David for 15 years. He'd handled Robert's estate, our wills, everything. Margaret, he said after I explained what had happened, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What Elena presented to you yesterday. There's no tax law change that would create the situation she described. None. What are you saying? I'm saying someone lied to you. Deliberately. And if you had signed those papers, you would have given away everything you own while getting nothing legally binding in return to ensure you could continue living in your own house. The room started spinning. David, I whispered, what do I do? David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Margaret, I want you to come to my office this afternoon. And I want you to bring someone with you. Someone Elena doesn't know. Do you have anyone like that? I thought about it. Most of my close friends knew Elena by now. But then I remembered Sarah Chun, Robert's physical therapist from his last year. Sarah and I had kept in touch, exchanging Christmas cards, the occasional coffee. Elena had never met her. Sarah came to David's office with me that afternoon. She was small, maybe 5'2", but she had this quiet strength that made you feel safe. During Robert's illness, she'd been the one person who always told us the truth, even when it was hard to hear. David laid out everything Elena had tried to get me to sign. Sarah read through it all, asking questions in her calm, methodical way. Margaret, David said finally, this document wouldn't just transfer ownership. It would give Marcus and Elena the right to sell everything immediately if they wanted. You'd have no legal recourse if they decided to evict you from your own home. Sarah looked at me with these steady, dark eyes. Margaret, you know what this is, don't you? I nodded. I couldn't say the word out loud, but I knew. It was theft. Planned, calculated theft. What Elena doesn't know, David continued, is that everything she and that notary told you was legally incorrect. And I have reason to believe this wasn't a mistake. He pulled out another folder. I did some research after your call. Elena Chun. Yes, she goes by Elena Patterson now, but her legal name is still Elena Chun. She's done this before. Sarah sat up straighter. Chun is my last name too. What's her full name? Elena Marie Chun, age 26, originally from Sacramento. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, I have a cousin Elena in Sacramento. Mid-20s, studies law. She trailed off, her expression changing. My cousin Elena, Sarah said slowly. She's been in trouble before. Financial trouble. She married an older man a few years ago. Convinced him to put everything in her name. Then divorced him and left him with nothing. The room was dead silent. Sarah, I said, What's your cousin's middle name? Marie. David immediately started making phone calls. Within an hour, we had Elena's full history. 3 marriages. 3 divorces. Each time, she'd convinced an older man with assets to transfer everything to her name for tax purposes or estate planning. Each time, she disappeared with everything once the transfers were complete. But she married Marcus, I said. He doesn't have assets. No, David said. But his mother does. And unlike her previous targets, you welcomed her into the family. You made her beneficiary on some accounts, gave her access to information about all your properties. She didn't need to divorce Marcus and run. She could stay, play the loving daughter-in-law, and gradually gain control of everything. Sarah was staring at the documents with this expression of fury I'd never seen on her gentle face. Margaret, she said, my cousin Elena, she specifically targets widows. She finds men who are close to their mothers, especially mothers with assets and not much close family left. She gets the sons to trust her, isolates the mothers from other influences, then moves in for the financial kill. She's been planning this since the day she met Marcus. David nodded grimly. The question is, how much does Marcus know? I thought about my son's voice on the phone, casual and distracted. I thought about how Elena always seemed to be the one who knew about my finances, my legal affairs. How she'd gradually become the person Marcus turned to for advice about complicated things. I don't think Marcus knows, I said finally. I think she's been manipulating him too. Sarah looked at David. What can we do legally? Well, Margaret hasn't signed anything, so no crime has been committed yet. But if Elena tries this again. She will, Sarah said. This is what she does. She'll increase the pressure now that the first attempt failed. David pulled out a legal pad. Here's what I'm thinking. Elena doesn't know that Margaret knows the truth. She doesn't know about Sarah's connection to her. And she certainly doesn't know that we have her complete legal history. Margaret, I want you to call Elena tomorrow. Tell her you've thought about what she said, and you're ready to sign the papers. What? I felt my heart racing. But, David continued, you want to make sure everything is done properly. Tell her you want your own attorney present when you sign. Tell her you want me there to review everything and make sure it's all legal. Sarah grinned. Elena will think you're just being cautious. She won't suspect you know the truth. And when she shows up with those fraudulent documents, David said, and tries to execute them in the presence of a licensed attorney who can testify to exactly what happened, that's when we have her. What about Marcus? I asked. Sarah and David exchanged a look. Margaret, Sarah said gently, we're going to record everything. If Marcus is innocent, the recording will prove Elena manipulated him too. If he's not innocent, then you need to know that too. I called Elena the next morning. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. Elena, it's Margaret. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, and you're right. I need to think about Marcus's future, not just my own comfort. Elena's voice immediately became warm and relieved. Oh, Mom, I'm so glad you called. I was worried we'd upset you. You didn't upset me. You made me think. That's what family does, right? I'd like to sign the papers, but I want to do everything properly. I want my attorney there to make sure we don't make any mistakes. There was a brief silence. Then, of course, that's actually very smart. When would you like to do this? We set it up for Friday afternoon at my house. Elena would bring the notary and Marcus. I would have David there to review everything. That Friday, I spent the morning with Sarah, going over everything one more time. David had set up a small recording device that looked like a decorative pen on my coffee table. Sarah was going to wait in my kitchen, out of sight but close enough to hear everything. At exactly 2 p.m., Elena arrived with Marcus and the notary. She was practically glowing with triumph. Marcus hugged me. Thanks for doing this, Mom. Elena explained how much money this could save us in the long run. That was when I knew for certain that my son had no idea what was really happening. David arrived a few minutes after them, carrying his briefcase and wearing his most professional expression. Elena introduced herself charmingly, thanking him for taking the time to help with our family financial planning. Of course, David said smoothly. It's always wise to have legal counsel review important documents. Elena spread the papers on my coffee table. They looked identical to what she'd brought before. The same fraudulent tax claims, the same complete transfer of assets. Now, David said, putting on his reading glasses, let me just review these documents to make sure everything is in order. He read silently for several minutes while Elena and the notary waited confidently. Then David looked up. Miss Chun, he said quietly, could you explain to me exactly which tax law changes you're referring to in this document? Elena's smile faltered for just a moment. I'm sorry. The tax law changes. The ones that create the estate tax vulnerabilities you've described to Mrs. Patterson. Could you cite the specific statutes? I'm not an attorney, Elena said. That's why we brought a notary to make sure everything was filed properly. David looked at the notary. Sir, are you an attorney? No, I'm just here to notarize signatures. I see. David set the papers down. Because the tax law issues described in these documents don't actually exist. The room went completely silent. Elena looked confused. I don't understand. Ms. Chun, there have been no recent changes to federal estate tax law that would create the scenario you've described to Mrs. Patterson. None. Marcus looked back and forth between Elena and David. What does that mean? David looked directly at Elena. It means, Ms. Chun, that you have attempted to defraud Mrs. Patterson by using false legal claims to pressure her into transferring her assets to you. Elena's face went white. That's ridiculous. I was trying to help. Ms. Elena Marichin of Sacramento, David continued. This is the same fraudulent scheme you used on Robert Walsh in 2021, on Thomas Bennett in 2019, and on James Mitchell in 2017. Elena bolted upright. I don't know what you're talking about. I have the court records right here, David said, pulling out a folder. 3 counts of elder fraud, 2 counts of identity theft, and 1 count of marriage fraud. You're currently wanted for questioning in connection with similar activities in Nevada. The notary was already packing up his things, clearly wanting to get out of there as fast as possible. Marcus stood up slowly, staring at Elena like he'd never seen her before. Elena, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Is this true? Elena looked around the room like a trapped animal. Then suddenly, her whole demeanor changed. The sweet, vulnerable act disappeared completely. You have no idea what it's like, she said, her voice cold and hard. To grow up with nothing. To watch people like you. She pointed at me. People who inherit everything, who never had to fight for anything, who just sit on piles of money while other people struggle. I earned this. I made Marcus happy. I made you feel loved and important. I gave you both exactly what you needed. That has value. Marcus was staring at her like she was speaking a foreign language. Elena, he said. You lied to me. About everything. I never lied about loving you, she said, but her voice was flat now, mechanical. I do love you. This was supposed to be good for both of us. Good for both of us? Marcus's voice was rising. You were going to steal my mother's house. It was going to be our house eventually anyway. I just made it happen sooner. David was writing notes while Elena talked, documenting everything she was admitting to. Miss Chun, he said. I'm going to advise you to stop talking and contact a lawyer. But Elena was past caring about legal advice. She turned to me with pure fury in her eyes. You know what your problem is, Margaret? You're selfish. You're a lonely old woman sitting on assets you don't even need, while young people like Marcus can't even afford to buy their own homes. You're right, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. I am lonely, and I do have more than I need. I looked directly at Elena. But that doesn't give you the right to steal from me. And it doesn't give you the right to manipulate my son. Elena left that afternoon with David's business card, and a strong suggestion that she contact a criminal defense attorney immediately. The notary had already disappeared. Marcus sat in my living room for 3 hours after she left, just staring at his hands. Mom, he said finally. How could I have been so stupid? You weren't stupid, sweetheart. You were in love. Elena is very good at what she does. But I should have protected you. I should have asked more questions. Sarah came out of the kitchen then, where she'd been waiting quietly. She sat down next to Marcus. Marcus, she said in that calm way of hers, predators like Elena target good people specifically because they trust and love easily. Your willingness to trust someone isn't a character flaw. It's one of your best qualities. Marcus looked at her, then at me. What happens now? David had already contacted the police. Elena's pattern of fraud across multiple states meant federal authorities would likely get involved. As for Marcus and me, now we figure out how to be a family again, I said. A smaller family, but an honest one. Elena was arrested 2 weeks later trying to pull the same scheme on an elderly man in Arizona. It turned out she had been married to Marcus legally, but she was still technically married to her previous victim in Nevada. So add bigamy to the list of charges. Marcus moved back in with me for a few months while he figured out his next steps. At first, I think he was ashamed. He kept apologizing, kept saying he should have protected me better. But gradually, we started talking about things we'd never discussed before. About how isolated I'd become since Robert died. About how Marcus had felt pressured to find someone to take care of me, so he wouldn't have to worry. About how we'd both been so focused on filling the hole Robert's death had left that we hadn't noticed someone was exploiting that vulnerability. Sarah started coming around more often. Not as my protector, but as my friend. She helped me see that Elena's manipulation had worked partly because I was hungry for connection, for feeling needed and valued. Margaret, she said one day while we were having coffee, you don't need someone to take advantage of you to feel important. You don't need to be anyone's mark to have worth. That hit me harder than I expected. I started therapy. At 71 years old, I started therapy. I joined a widow support group. I started volunteering at the Literacy Center downtown. I began building a life that was mine, not just something I was waiting to share with others. Marcus started dating again eventually. But this time, he introduced me to Sarah before he introduced me to any new girlfriends. Sarah had a knack for asking the right questions, and noticing the things I'd been too eager to overlook. But here's the part one didn't expect. The part that changed everything. About 6 months after Elena's arrest, I got a call from a woman named Janet Walsh in Sacramento. She'd gotten my number from the police detective handling Elena's case. Mrs. Patterson, she said. I understand Elena Chin tried to defraud you too. That's right, I said. She succeeded with my husband Robert. Before he died, she convinced him to put everything in her name. Our house, his pension, everything. When he passed away, she took it all and disappeared. I sat down heavily. I'm so sorry. The detective said you and your attorney documented everything Elena tried to do to you. He said your recording might be enough to help us recover some of what she stole from Robert's estate. We talked for over an hour. Janet was 78, living in a one-bedroom apartment on Social Security after losing everything to Elena's scheme. When I hung up the phone, I realized something that took my breath away. Elena had targeted me because she thought I was isolated, vulnerable, easy to manipulate. But by trying to steal from me, she'd actually led me to find my strength. And now, that strength could help other people she'd hurt. That was the moment everything changed. Not just for me, but for how I understood what had happened to me. I called David that afternoon. I want to help Janet Walsh. What can we do? Well, David said, if you're willing to testify about Elena's methods, and if we can demonstrate a pattern of fraud, I'll do whatever it takes. Over the next year, I testified in 3 different cases against Elena. Each time, I met another elderly person she'd targeted. Each time, I realized how lucky I'd been to have David, to have Sarah, to have caught Elena before she succeeded. But more than that, I realized that Elena had been wrong about me. I wasn't just a lonely old woman sitting on assets I didn't need. I was someone with resources, experience, and knowledge that could make a difference. I started working with David to create educational workshops for seniors about financial fraud. We partnered with the district attorney's office to teach people how to recognize the warning signs Elena had used on me. Janet Walsh became one of our first volunteer speakers. She would tell her story about what happened when the fraud succeeded, and I would tell mine about what happened when it failed. The difference, Janet would say, wasn't intelligence or strength. It was having the right people around you when you needed them most. Within 2 years, our workshops had helped prevent at least a dozen similar fraud attempts. Sarah started bringing her physical therapy clients who were widows or widowers. Marcus started telling his coworkers about the warning signs to watch for with their aging parents. We'd turned Elena's predatory scheme into a community network of protection and support. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe, like and share. And I'll see you in my video.